We're so glad to have with us this morning Karl Kurtz, who is a political scientist and who worked for NCSL for over 40 years and is really widely considered an expert in the American legislature. Now, Karl, after 40 years with NCSL, you went on and started what's called Legislators, looking at different legislatures, again, continuing your work that you had here at NCSL. But you have just conducted a study where you looked at the demographics of state legislatures. Tell me a little bit more about this study.
So this was jointly funded by NCSL and the Pew Charitable Trusts. And it is an effort to look up, to take a look at the people whom we elect to serve in our state legislatures all across the country.
Tell us a little bit about what, according to what the questions and stuff that you sent out, what surprised you the most about this study?
The interesting thing is that I think a lot of us have a stereotype of who a state legislator is. We think about white, male, Protestant, probably from the baby boom generation, somebody with a business background, and maybe a little bit more educated than the general public. It's kind of an image of establishment America, the people who run our businesses and our government. Well, it turns out when you combine all 6 of those demographic characteristics, there are only 50 out of 7,383 state legislators in the United States who combine all of those.
And Karl, out of this, what are some of the most important trends in the makeup of the state legislatures that you found?
Well, perhaps in the most important categories of women and minorities, our state legislatures still lag behind the general population, but over time they've been growing more diverse, and they're more diverse today than they have ever been. Women, the good news for women is that since in the last generation or so, they have substantially increased their share. They are now at about 24% of our state legislators, but of course they make up more than half, 51% of the U.S. population. So they're still lagging behind, but they continue to increase, although there's been they've stalled out a little bit. They've stayed over the last 5 years or so right at that 24%. Minorities are also increasing, racial and ethnic minorities. African Americans are close to having a share of state legislative membership that's equivalent to their share of the population. Hispanics are the most rapidly growing share of the membership of state legislatures, but they still lag substantially behind the general population.
Karl, let's change a little bit around and talk about term limits. Of course, they were first imposed on state legislatures around 25 years ago. According to your study, I mean, have they changed the makeup of legislatures?
One of the big arguments in favor of term limits was that it would increase the number of women and the number of minorities who would serve in state legislatures. It turns out, though, now a quarter of a century later, it's made almost no difference at all. The percentage of women in the 15 term-limited legislatures compared to the 35 non-term limited legislatures is just about exactly the same with racial and ethnic minorities. The only area where it's made a difference is that the average age of state legislators in term-limited states is 3 years younger than in the non-term limited states.
All right, talk to us a little bit about how are members of Congress in Washington different from state legislatures or legislators?
Actually, they're pretty similar, and that's not surprising because half of all the members of Congress previously served in state legislatures. They have a similar age, similar racial and ethnic makeup, somewhat similar women. The Congress lags a little bit behind on representation of women. The one area where there's a significant difference is that it is in the occupations. You have probably twice as many attorneys serving in state legislatures, in Congress, as you do in state legislatures.
Karl, how important, and you kind of touched on this earlier, is it that the state legislators look like America?
Well, I think ideally everyone would like to have their elected officials be a reflection of the population, although maybe most of us might prefer that they'd be a little bit more educated than the rest of the population. But that really isn't the important thing about representation. The important thing is the willingness and ability of members to listen to, pay attention to, and respond to their constituents. And in order to do that, you don't have to look exactly like them. You can have a minority legislator who represents a majority white district and who can do just as effective a job of paying attention and responding to the needs of constituents. So I like to say that representation is in the doing, not in the belonging.
Karl, that's all the questions that I had for you. Is there anything that I have left out that you would like to mention?
I don't think so, thank you.
Karl, thank you so much for joining us in this e-video update.